why don't we start with just introducing yourselves and briefly talking about what the company does, and then like once we do that, then we'll talk about like go into founding stories, like how the company came together. So from Tanmai, maybe you can start.
Hey everybody. I'm Tanmai. I'm the CEO co-founder at Hasura. We solve for data access so that if you're building applications or you're building services or you're building integration layers and you need APIs to connect to your data sources, we help you automate that process. We add a security layer, a caching layer, and a GraphQL layer to help make that access easy. We're an open source first company, and we have a cloud managed cloud solution and enterprise solution as well, and we'll probably be digging more into that later. But happy to be here and happy to connect with all of you folks.
Hi everyone, excited to be here. I'm Abhinav. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Postman. Postman is an API platform for building and using APIs used by more than 20 million developers across the planet. We help you build APIs that you probably build on Hasura or any other system, or use APIs if you are integrating them into your applications. And we've been partnering with Nexus since 2014, and I'm excited to share the journey and share some learnings so far. Thank you.
Swapnil?
Hey everyone, good to see you. Although I can't see you, but I'll assume I can see you. And Jishnu, thank you so much for inviting. It's an honor to be on a panel with Abhinav and Tanmai. I'm Swapnil. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Observe.ai. We are a contact center AI company that helps enterprises provide delightful customer experiences to their consumers across the globe. We do this by understanding the speech and natural language in every single interaction in a contact center, and use that to empower automations and workflows in the contact center. It's been about 5 years for us with Nexus, and we really enjoyed the journey, and happy to share our journey and stories and learnings from that as we took this B2B. And for context, we're a B2B SaaS company, 100% top-down enterprise SaaS. So happy to share our learnings and journeys.
Thank you. So let's start with really founding stories, how the companies came together. And Abhinav, I will start with you. And obviously, there are fond memories. We have been working with you from almost the beginning. We remember visiting you in your kind of office come home, where three of you, along with your other CEO, Chief Entertainment Officer, Cooper, the dog. So it has been something, obviously, from that journey, from that day to today. Even going back further, maybe you can talk about how really Postman came together.
Postman started out as a side project of mine, which came through the pain points me and my co-founders Ankit and Abhijit experienced in their development journeys. So before Postman, I was at Yahoo as an intern, which was probably my only real professional career job. And when I was working with Ankit, I found out that APIs were a big pain to deal with, and that experience stayed with us. And I started my first company after Yahoo, and we had the same challenge there. And I met Abhijit as well. And what we kind of realized was, more and more of our time was spent in wrangling with APIs versus writing code, and there were no good tools out there. So we got together, built the first very bare bones version of the product to really solve problems for ourselves. We put it up on the Chrome Web Store, which was just coming up back then, and we basically found out that the development community really got excited. They started recommending it, sharing it, and before we actually were still in that 3-person garage kind of mode, and we had 500,000 users who just came organically, and while we were figuring out what we would do next, we were scouted by Nexus, and we decided to it's a good feeling to start a company with $1 million check, but we were fortunate enough. And I think our core thesis behind starting the company was, as we started talking to these developers, we saw that how big of a problem in the future, this would become. We saw teams struggling with APIs. We saw large organizations struggling with APIs, and it became, a mission for the company to solve for that. Of course, the vision evolved over time. Now we see APIs as the fundamental building blocks of modern technology, but that really kind of was the genesis.
Thank you. Thank you. Tanmai?
Some similarities to what Abhinav spoke about as well. My only real job before Hasura was a few internships. I think a brief stint at Microsoft Research, and so immediately after that, I started my own consulting practice. I kind of wanted to get a sense of how people are building applications, and I wanted to kind of build applications with them to see what it would feel like. So the first company that I started with, my founding team that is a part of Hasura today as well, we started building applications for people with people, all kinds of companies, from like large multinational banks to tiny startups to like manufacturing companies who are building their first digital product and stuff like that, right? And what we kind of felt was that this whole process of application development really sucks. There's a part of it that is specific enough to warrant some work to be put there, but it's also undifferentiated that nobody should actually be building it by hand. And the state of automation or where we are as a world today doesn't need that to happen. But it was a slightly crazy way of doing things. So what we did was we grew to maybe like a 50 to 60 member kind of consulting team, out of which about 10 people were, maybe 5 to 10 people were on the platform team, and the rest were kind of building products with people. And the platform got to a state of maturity where we were like, hey, this has been super useful for us. Maybe other people would benefit from it too. We shut down the services arm, and we started working with Nexus. I think we raised about 1.6 million, and we were figuring out kind of how to take that to market. And we had this complex platform, and we said, hey, this is like complicated. As we kind of decided to figure out how to get this in the hands of developers, we really believed, and it was a personal choice that we wanted everything to be as kind of developer-led and product-led as possible, and we didn't want to do, we didn't understand, and we didn't want to do kind of a sales-led motion. So we simplified that platform down. We took up the core part of Hasura out, and we open sourced it. I think it gained a lot of traction pretty quickly. We had, I think, 3 Fortune 10 users within the first year running workloads in production, and that's kind of how Hasura got started. So that's us.
Thank you, Tanmai. Swapnil?
Yeah, I think there's other than Nexus, there's definitely one thing common between the three of us, which is we all had one job before starting our company. So my first job and only job was at Twitter here in San Francisco, and this is 2015. I was in Bay Area, feeling a lot of FOMO from people like Abhinav and Tanmai actually, and other folks from my college who were all starting companies. Right, I think there was a time when companies like Snapdeal, Flipkart, Zomato, everyone was coming out, and a lot of them were IT Delhi, juniors or seniors or batchmates, right? So I had a lot of FOMO. And so the way Observe started was a little different than the two companies that you all heard about. I jumped into it with the goal of starting a company. Like I left a job, moved to India in 2015, and the intent was that I want to start a company. Right, so I spent 2 years doing primary research. I spent a lot of time in understanding different problem areas, from insurance to financial services to credit. Right. And in this journey, I really want to call out, I actually worked very closely with Nexus, even though we were not a company, it was just me individual and my co-founder. The Nexus has not made an investment, but Nexus was even a part of that journey even back then, right? I would meet Puneet and Jishnu back then, and Prateek, and we would brainstorm ideas, right? And they would connect me with people to help discover ideas and explore ideas, right? So my journey and Observe's journey with Nexus started actually even before sort of Observe started. So we're doing a lot of primary research, and as part of the primary research, spend a lot of time in contact centers, right? As you all know, India is the big BPO hub of the world. you have massive amounts of customer service agents, sales agents out there in India, and then also Manila. So I spent a lot of time in these industries and actually walked the floor. So it was like literally primary research. I was sitting next to the user and just watching them, what they were doing, right? What workflows they were using, what systems they were using. So did a lot of that primary research, and the way it clicked, right? Especially coming from a software engineering background, was we all talk about technology. We talk about AI and Tesla and generative AI these days. Right? We talk about such amazing technologies. But if you go and look at contact centers, right, there's 17 million people globally. But if you look at the software they use, the workflows they use, you would realize like that world is still in 90s, right? The softwares are really, really on premise. A lot of manual workflows, right? Barely any use of technology. A lot of tedious processes, and the cost of all of this is like when we as consumers have really bad experiences, right? When we call AT&T or Airtel or anybody, right, we have such bad experiences, right? And that's because of the software these people use, right? So that was the genesis of the company, right? The problem statement was, how do we make every worker in a contact center 10x better and faster, which will lead to improving better consumer experience for everyone, right? And at that point of time, there was the surge in, that was the first wave, I would say, of like AI, and the term was deep learning, right? And deep learning made massive advancements on speech. That was the first front, where the speech to text accuracy phenomenally changed, and the cost of speech to text came down as well, right? So now you can actually use it for commercial applications. So that combined with a large business problem is how sort of Observe started. And then our journey was more, it's a B2B SaaS company, so we had to raise capital upfront. We spent a year and a half building the product, and then eventually go to market in 2019. Happy to walk through that journey as we go through the panel today. But that's how Observe started.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing, and good to see the contrast. I think Tanmai and Abhinav first solved the problem they were facing, and then kind of like went on to see that they are representative user of a large user base and build the company. On the other hand, Swapnil came from a technology angle where he had inspiration, then figured out the use case and kind of navigated his way. Abhinav, you started in 2014 formally. I mean, probably little earlier, conceptualizing. Tanmai 2016 and Swapnil 2018. What were the biggest challenges you faced? And you all started in India, and I'm sure when you started, you had an ambition of building global, but the way you would go about is take one day at a time and go from there. So in the beginning, when you started, what are the biggest challenges and how did you address? And would love for all of you to share.
I mean, when we started and we tell people that we'd build Postman, nobody would believe me. They thought that I was working as part of like a satellite office in Bangalore in Indiranagar, and we then tell people, no, actually, we are building it, and it took a few tries, and in the initial days, thankfully that did not affect users. They were using the product. I think we, if I could summarize, essentially the first challenge was believing ourselves that, okay, this could be a viable business, because, if you'd go around and ask people that, okay, what would you pay for? Would you ever invest in this technology if it was fully built out? The answer was typically no. And we had to really realize that, okay, if we are going to stay here, look at the target market just in our immediate neighborhood, we might not build a category leading company. So that was kind of like the first barrier that we saw. Thankfully, fundraising, as I mentioned, was not an issue. But even as we looked at the VC community here, it was still pretty nascent. And as we looked at how the journey would progress in the future, what kinds of capital we'd need, what kinds of expertise we'd need, we did think about that. Hiring was a continuous challenge. Hiring engineering talent that really believed in great products, hiring managers who really could manage creative talent, was all of these were pretty hard learnings. And we found out that raising money actually did not make those things go away. You still had to kind of work through a lot of that. So initial challenges of product market fit. I used to travel to the Bay Area a lot, meet a lot of our customers, really understand what are the pain points they're seeing through. The first version, which we were representative users of, was easy, but the second product, the third product version, was incredibly hard, and we had to iterate a lot on that. And it took a while. Like, fortunately, we had fantastic initial hires. They're still with the company and they have really grown in their careers. But I guess if they were not in place, it would have been very challenging. And happy to talk through the move as well. Like, we eventually moved headquarters to the Bay Area. The company is now much more global. That introduced its own set of challenges. But we've kind of now going from 2014 to now. I think things have definitely changed quite a lot. There's a thriving like engineering culture in Bangalore and in other areas. There are many more companies willing to pay for software now. So it's definitely changed, but those were the challenges that I remember experiencing.
Got it. Thank you, Tanmai.
Yeah, plus one to everything Abhinav said. Very similar to Abhinav. I remember our first attempt at fundraising being an entire nightmare. Nobody had any idea what we were doing or why we were doing it, and it was brutal. I think that's kind of, in a way, when when you kind of start hiring and start trying to grow the company out and figuring out product distribution and stuff like that. I think another important challenge that comes to mind in the early days that is interesting to look at in hindsight, and I like the way Samir put this. For an open source company, there's kind of this project market fit and product market fit stage, right? And I think viewing it from that point of view was interesting, because the first part of the problem for us was to nail distribution and to figure out what project market fit means for us. For us, it was adoption and mission critical usage. And only once we kind of reached that phase would the next phase of the company begin, which was product market fit, right? Which is that now we'll have a commercial version of the product that people will pay for. And so I think like there were kind of unique challenges in both of those phases of the journey. Echoing Abhinav, I think a lot of it is around kind of team building, who you want to hire for what phase, how you want to kind of checkpoint and milestone those phases for yourself. Hiring the first set of leaders who are kind of, say, you go from a team of a small founding team and people you're working directly with to the first set of kind of managers in the team, so like quote unquote middle managers in the team, to hiring leaders, and that was also very interesting and challenging, but all fun in hindsight.
Thank you, Swapnil.
And just for clarification, is it mostly the early stage challenges, or your
early?
Question
like I was thinking of early. Like
early.
I'll come to the other challenges.
Got it. Yeah, so I think our biggest challenge, if you look at the 4 vectors of what people define as what you need a startup to be successful, right? Like good team, good funding, good product, good market, right? I think on the team front, we were very lucky. We had a pretty strong co-founding team, which had like experience needed to sort of take care of the early stage of a B2B SaaS company. And we had a go-to-market co-founder, we had a technical co-founder, and we had a product co-founder, right? Like this covers what you need for the first 2 years, right? So we didn't have problem there. From a funding perspective, also we were lucky, right? We got to partner with amazing investors like Y Combinator and Nexus early on. That was not our biggest challenge. I would say our biggest challenge happened to be on solving this whole problem of product combined with the market, right? Because we were a B2B SaaS company, and even our first deal was $100,000 deal, right? We were in this vicious cycle of, you go to a customer, you want customers to build a product, but customers won't come until you have a product. So now you're stuck, right? Like, what do you go and tell a customer to sign up for a $100,000 product when there's no product? At the same time, you can't do user research, you can't do validation, you can't deep dive into pain points. So we had to take a plunge in building the product first, with our own hypotheses, and then using that to go to market, and then come back again to the product and actually, in a way, like fix the product, update the product, build the product now that we had customers, right? But we had to sort of like bite the bullet on the product side. And, if I look back, like some of those assumptions in the product were actually not true, right? So that was, I would say, one of our biggest challenge in key learning, that, we should have found like better ways to do validation and user research before even building the product. But at that point, like to come out of that vicious cycle, that was the only way. Build some product, somehow get a customer or two, learn from them, validate, come back to the product again, and now fix the product. And this is the actual product, right? The initial one was not a product based on user problems and validation. The initial one was mocks and images and a flow, right? It was not even like a persona based product. So that was the biggest challenge we faced in the very early days, and that led us to some challenges later on where we had to redo a lot of the product once we got like actual true users and customers.
And one thing, I would add, Jishnu, as probably a lot of entrepreneurs in the audience, everything that people would tell us was a challenge was actually not a challenge back then. So the first one was, I heard from a lot of people that, oh, you are an Indian product company, nobody's going to buy your product. And we had a good product and people bought the product. So, those were things that there were a lot of assumptions built in, at least when we started. And, we essentially had to like ignore all of it. So kind of what looked like a challenge, what people would tell you was a very different thing, what customers really eventually, wanted. And I think probably Swapnil, that resonated, and Tanmai with you as well. Like when you go to customers with a product, they're really thinking about their problems and not your problems. They're not thinking about whether this company is going to raise. I mean, maybe they think about whether they raise the next round when you're an enterprise, in enterprise B2B. But really, in the early stages, really saying that we are solving a customer's problem and not every other challenge in the world. Just keeping that focus was also a very big challenge.
Super helpful. Thanks for sharing. And on that note, Abhinav, I have to say, I still remember there were a lot of proud moments in that discovery, even for us to be working with entrepreneurs like yourself. Like in Bay Area, I was in one of the cafes, and I could overhear on the table adjacent where somebody was showing, hey, look, this is the tool I am using, and I saw that they are talking about Postman, and nowhere, like they have no clue of who I am, and Abhinav was nowhere to be seen. There was nobody of. I don't think at that time there was anyone of Postman, or maybe one or two people, or maybe not.
No.
And they were explaining what Postman is and how beautiful the product is. So so it just resonates, as you say. Like if you build something that solves someone's pain
that
point.
was a hiring challenge for us, which is I didn't even perceive it. A lot of people did not apply to Postman because they thought, we're a Bay Area company. We had to really go and tell people that we have an office here, and you can actually apply. Now, of course, remote first solves for that. Like you're effectively everywhere, but it was a surprise. And I think eventually we found a recruiter who went around, told people that the company is here. So, fun moments, like the challenges that are not challenges, you can laugh about later.
Absolutely. And actually, on that note, I think a good segue will be, so you were building a global company, which you knew from day one. Like all of you, as you kind of thought of the problem, as people started using you, whether it is open source way like Tanmai's, or just a beautiful. Your first the initial product was also open source, right? Like,
yeah, we had open source roots, but we didn't market the product.
But it's totally PLG, product led growth.
Yeah.
And Swapnil, of course, like the segment that he's building, and the product that has been building. You all knew that you are building global company. The question is, when did you decide to move to US? And what was the trigger? And how do you kind of think about it?
I can go first.
Sure.
I mean, I think for me it was like day one, kind of day minus 365 basically. So the story basically the experience I had was in my previous company, we were building an app, and we thought if we add more features, we make it bigger, we add like tons of things, it's going to be awesome. A lot of people are going to use it. and it was a panorama app, and we thought we had lots of pixels, and then this little thing called Instagram comes around, and in 2 years it gets bought by Facebook for $1 billion, and we're like, it doesn't even have all the pixels that our app has. But I learned that it has the users, it has the ecosystem, and Zuckerberg lives close by, right? So I didn't want to be close to Zuckerberg, but what we learned was the value of being in the right place at the right time, and really crafting a product for your target audience, right? And Instagram story is interesting. I mean, Instagram found its target audience in Japan, interestingly, but at least we knew that, okay, if we have to build a category leading product, you have to be at the forefront of technology, and you want to be around people, around the ecosystem, who would give you constructive feedback, who would be your early champions, and just knowing that, like, how fast technology could change. We chose our investors. We traveled early. We started really setting it up right off the bat, and that helped us very much in the long run. And I can talk about how we managed the balance. And of course, we didn't move as such. We expanded, and we still have a sizable presence in Bangalore and across India now. But to be, I think, a global product is like a day one decision. You can't really build a product or a company on a very localized market and expand quickly. It would probably be impossible, or probably take a lot of time. So that was kind of like our learning.
Similar to what Abhinav was saying, I think for us, the 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 light bulb click moment of the importance of the US ecosystem happened in a very similar way to what Abhinav was talking about. You kind of gravitate towards where you're getting the most amount of feedback, where the investment ecosystem, whether it's Mark Zuckerberg or other VCs or angel investors and operators, understand your kinds of businesses. You kind of gravitate towards that. We unfortunately were not day minus 365. We have to go to the US, but because there was a longer build phase for us. But as our product usage started getting more and more mature, we started seeing more maturity in the ecosystem. We realized that we need to be much closer to people to consumers who are giving us feedback, who are rapid adopters of technology. And again, during that time, it has changed a lot in India now, but during that time, I think there's a kind of focused feedback um, that especially from the developer community, that is a little more accessible in the US ecosystem. They're very used to this idea of building new developer tools, using new developer tools, being at the forefront of innovation, right? So the kind of feedback that you get from that user group is better, right? It's easier to get that. It's much harder to do that if you're not in the US ecosystem, if you're not in the Bay Area ecosystem. A lot of that has changed now, so I don't think that applies as much. So I feel like that part has shifted. I think the second stage of this for us on the importance of the US ecosystem was investors and also talent. So, for example, again at the time, in the early days when we were bringing on our first product people, right? Product management and GTM, so sales and marketing, for open source businesses is very new in the world and very new in India, right? So even it's not as established a playbook as a SaaS playbook is. So a lot of that talent and understanding the kinds of people who have seen this before, who can see problems a year ahead of what you can yourself, right? Otherwise, you waste time. A lot of that talent was in the US ecosystem as well. So um, I think tapping into that was really, really important for us. And so that kind of made it important to accelerate kind of a presence in the US ecosystem as much as possible. So today we're similar to Abhinav. We're split across the US and India. So we're about 40% in India, 40% in the US, and 20% elsewhere. But that was kind of our catalyzing factors to have more of a US presence.
Thank you. Swapnil, anything to add here?
Yeah, I think it's slightly different for us because of we are a top-down B2B SaaS company. So one of the key principles that we use in the company is DNA of the company, and we strongly believe that DNAs of the companies are very, very hard to change, right? You become a company, and then when you try to become a different company, it's like a very hard shift, right? So what that meant in our case was we always knew that our TAM is US, right? That's where the spenders are. That's where large enterprises with large contact centers are, right? India was never a market. Southeast was never a market. Australia was never a market, right? It was very clear that US is where the dollar is. So we always wanted to make sure that we go to US market from day one. And I think some members have used like day minus 365, day zero. Absolutely. Like we never even spoke to a single Indian customer or a Southeast customer or a Middle East customer or anyone because we didn't want that to impact the DNA of the company, right? Because it ends up being a vicious cycle. If we had sold to like one customer in India, then imagine your CS team and implementation team is catered toward that Indian customer. They're giving you more and more feedback now. Your product is getting feedback from an Indian customer. Your pricing, packaging, P&L, collections process, like it's all built toward that, right? And then more referrals. It's easy because it's easy, right? So we took that like hard plunge that hey, even though we have connections in India and we can get these customers, like we will take a hard stance and go to US because we know that's where the long-term game is. That's where the big dollars are. So we were very, very US focused from day one. But that being said, we have still maintained a very clear divide between India and US. India is our biggest headquarters right now, actually. So all of our engineering, all of our product management has always been in India. It's the US go-to-market that we did, and we had the go-to-market teams in the US, right? So from day one, we were always a two-legged company. India was doing all the product and development and everything, and US was doing go-to-market. One co-founder was in India, one co-founder was in US, and I was doing India-US travel. That was our setup. But from a business perspective, we were 100% US focused, and are still US focused from day one.
Got it. Thank you. The segue to this would be talking about go-to-market, and this time, Swapnil, we can start with you. So it's an interesting mix of companies we have here, right? On one hand, Tanmai and Abhinav are building what is known as product-led growth, product-led companies, like where the growth is driven by product, self-serve product, getting discovered in a self-serve way, and ultimately usage is getting converted to paid usage, and go to product market fit is getting established. Whereas Swapnil, you are building sort of sales serve go to market. So the question is, when you started setting up go to market teams, like who do you hire? Like for what role did you first hire? I mean, did you go for marketing? Did you go for customer success? Did you go for sales? In what order?
Yeah.
And then I would also like to hear from Abhinav and Tanmai. What was their approach?
Yep. So I think one thing that we got really lucky right as a company that really helped us in US go to market was I all my work was in B2C. I was at Twitter before that. Interned at Google. 100% B2C. Don't have any background of what is even B2B. Forget about SaaS. Like I had zero idea, right? My other co-founder, who was also technical, like had less experience, but we had a co-founder, Sharath, right, who was a third co-founder, and he had a lot of experience in the US go-to-market, right? Like he knows how to sell deals, he knows how B2B SaaS works, contracting, packaging, pricing, all of that. So I think having that knowledge in the co-founding team played like a very key role for us in just navigating the B2B SaaS ecosystem, right? Because a lot of us, especially who are not coming from the B2B SaaS ecosystem, are starting B2B SaaS companies, right? So we have to learn somehow. So I think that played a big role. And in terms of building the go-to-market, I actually think in the early days, it's actually just one person, right? You bring like a go-to-market leader, because if you have zero customers, these VPs are you're too early to hire VPs, or you're too early to hire any of these senior leaders. You basically need like one go-to-market person who can somehow hustle on LinkedIn and do outbounds, or buy a lead list and do outbound on their own. They can do demos on their own. They can go through the procurement process and sell these deals. And then finally, like do the initial implementation. So you actually need to see, before hiring a specialized function, right? This is more of a philosophical thing. Like the founder needs to see the journey themselves first. right? Like we can't hire marketing, we can't hire sales, we can't hire implementation if I don't even know how our implementation works, or like how customer success work, or what do we want the customer success leader to do. So in the beginning, I think the idea is like if you have I'm assuming you have a product, you have one or two pilot customers, or you have one customer, you would hire, usually people end up hiring VP sales. That's the title you go for, with the expectation that they have to generate their own pipeline and they have to close the deals, and then they would have to like play a big role in implementation. So they own the full customer journey. They're not just hey, give me the leads, I'll work on the leads, I'll close the deal and go away. So my recommendation in the early days is to have someone, and that's the role Sharath, right, our co-founder played, right? Like he was running everything, right? So that helped us, the founders, learn what kind of marketing we need, what kind of sales we need, and what kind of CS we need. And then over time, as we scaled, then we built specialized functions, specialized leaders.
Got it. So two core points you mentioned. One is the founding team, the founders will have to spark the fire before you bring in go-to-market leaders to add fuel to the fire. You can't expect go-to-market leader to come in and magically figure out, what is the go-to-market. And you also mentioned that, it seems that you have followed kind of like, bring in design partners or initial customers first before thinking of marketing and other functions. Because okay. So that's a great. So Abhinav, I would love to hear from you, like, what was when you started thinking of go-to-market, how do you go about it? What was the trigger? Who did you hire?
Yeah, I mean, with respect to hiring, it was a specific challenge to us because, developers are allergic to marketing and sales tactics generally. So the more we'd want to market, the less they would like to buy. And actually, people would get visibly annoyed that why are you doing this? I don't want to buy. So we had to kind of navigate that hurdle, which we did initially through what became, known as PLG later on. We tell this story often that my co-founder Abhijit was actually demoing the payment flow of how payments work, and during the demo we saw a sale go through, and we were like all clapping, we're like great job with the code, and that actually was our first sale. So we kind of latched onto that, and we had more people buy, but every time we tried to shift the curve a little bit of that buying behavior, it would not turn. But we kept trying. Our first hire was a head of marketing, which I think is a very critical hire if you are going over to the US, really understanding the nuances of the US market. How do you, communicate? How do you write your blog posts? How do you do press releases? What is a CEO supposed to say? All those things were very important for us. Our head of marketing also, built the community. So we had a developer relations function, which was kind of also very unique to us. Then we had a head of customer success, who really started managing, took over the support tickets. Initially all the founders did support tickets. We were like the top three, ticket solvers on Zendesk. But then we had to bring someone on to lead it. And he also then took over the inside sales motion that we kind of built a little bit. That continued on for a while until we brought in, enterprise sales leader, which started the journey for enterprise sales. Along the journey, we also brought in a head of growth, which is similar to like B2C functions. A head of growth can really help you look through what are the product journeys that lead to conversion moments and optimize that. Initially, when you start with a product in the PLG motion, you kind of just put a buy button out and you don't really measure. But over time, we got more disciplined with the distinction between our end user, the buyer, and in the enterprise motion, it changed to the end user, a champion, and an economic buyer. So we had to then design, our product, our marketing motion, and it's been a constant, evolution. It's not static. Most probably, the first few things that you would do are going to change pretty soon. So but we continue experimenting, we continue learning.
Slightly different journey for us. Our first GTM function was community, and that was part of the engineering team, my co-founder leading it. And so we bootstrapped the community function. Then we started hiring. We started taking parts of our product engineering team and moving them exclusively into kind of a community role. The next hire was on, or the next role that we crafted out was customer success, which was really important because people were starting to go into production and they needed support, and the product engineering team could not help them anymore. And that was really important because it was important to get people in production using Hasura at scale, right? Otherwise, we don't get to the next stage. Immediately after that, and this is similar to Swapnil's point, we brought on board a sales leader, and the early team was deeply involved in sales, and that's, I think, necessary. In fact, if anything, I think we probably hired our sales leader a little earlier than we ought to have. But that was a good time. That's a good time when you're saying, here's a commercial flavor of the product. Let's start using it, but you have to be very closely involved in understanding what people are buying and why they're buying and stuff like that. And then after that, we brought on board marketing, and product marketing is something that we're bringing on now. So that was the sequence of hiring for us.
So great. Just to kind of summarize what you mentioned, probably there is some commonality in both of these things, especially for PLG-led product building. First, you drive product user fit. You have a product and you have users. That leads to community. And to an extent, product, community, and I guess content and the materials around communication, that virtuous cycle leads to eventual product market fit. So that part is happening mostly based on the back of the product. And then you start hiring. When you think of core GTM, it is more marketing and customer success before sales, which is like, for a sales-led company, it's a little different. So it's a good insight, like depending on what you are building and what is the nature of your product and nature of your market, you have to adjust and adapt your go-to-market strategy accordingly.
So one thing, Jishnu, in our journey, we actually maintained our support channel pretty closely. Like a lot of our deals came through people writing in through support. And if you looked at their signature, they were the directors and VPs of companies. And in a typical motion, support gets outsourced, or you're like, okay, we're not going to look at tickets. So our first few deals, in that inbound motion, were basically spotting that trend. And that we actually ended up hiring support people in the US, which was the exact opposite of what typically companies would do, which was to hire support in India. And that actually paid off dividends.
And initial support was done by founders and core engineers, and then you brought in support people.
Yeah. So the first goal was, are people having a great experience? And soon, when we solved those problems in the product, it became actually, the start of the go-to-market motion.
Thank you. So with that, we would like to open it up to audience for